Washington, D.C., the summer of 1971 was like no other. The sweltering heat weighed heavily on the city, but an even darker shadow loomed over its streets. The freeway phantom was out there somewhere, and no one knew who would be next. Mrs. Johnson, a concerned mother, looking out the window anxiously as her daughter plays outside. "Darlenia, you stay close, you hear me? Don't go wandering off." Darlenia Johnson, a 16-year-old girl, rolling her eyes but staying within sight. "Yes, Mama, I won't go far." Darlenia Johnson, like many other girls in her neighborhood, lived under the constant watchful eye of her parents. Fear has become a part of daily life. The string of murders began to unravel the very fabric of the community. Trust turned into suspicion, and every shadow seemed to hide a lurking menace. Reverend Thomas, a community leader addressing a concerned crowd at a town hall meeting. "We must stand together in these trying times. The devil walks among us, and only through unity can we hope to protect our children." Mrs. Spinks, mother of the first victim, Carol Spinks, tears streaming down her face. "My baby was just going to the store. She never came back. Who could do such a thing?" Detective Anderson, a seasoned detective, speaking to a group of reporters. "We're doing everything we can. We're following every lead, turning over every stone. But we need the community's help. If anyone knows anything, no matter how small, come forward." Reporter, jotting down notes. "Detective, do you have any suspects? Any leads at all?" Detective Anderson, sighing. "We're working around the clock. This monster won't get away with this." The pain of losing a child to the freeway phantom was a burden no parent should bear. Brenda Crockett's mother felt this pain acutely. Mrs. Crockett, mother of Brenda Crockett, sitting at her kitchen table, clutching a photograph of her daughter. "She called home, you know. She said a white man had her, but she didn't know where she was. How could this happen?" Mr. Crockett, Brenda's father, placing a reassuring hand on his wife's shoulder. "We'll find him. We'll find the man who did this, I swear it." The community's grief turned into a burning desire for justice. But the killer remained a step ahead, always slipping through the cracks. As the years passed, the freeway phantom's identity remained a haunting enigma. The streets of Washington, D.C. were forever scarred by the memories of those dark days. Young woman in the present day, reading an old newspaper article, shaking her head. How could they never catch him? How could he just vanish? Her friend looking over her shoulder, sighing. Some mysteries just never get solved. But those girls, they deserve justice. The story of the freeway phantom is not just a tale of terror, but a reminder of the resilience of a community, the enduring pain of loss, and the relentless pursuit of truth. The 1970s were a time of great change and upheaval in Washington, D.C. The city, a microcosm of the nation's struggles and aspirations, was grappling with its own unique set of challenges. The streets of Washington, D.C. in the 1970s were vibrant yet tense. The civil rights movement had brought significant progress, but the scars of inequality were far from healed. Marcus, a young African-American activist walking through a bustling street. "Things might be changing, but for us, it's still a battle every day. The fight isn't over just because some laws changed." Lila, his friend and fellow activist, nodding in agreement. "Yeah, Marcus, integration's one thing, but look around. Poverty, violence, lack of opportunities, it's all still here." Washington, D.C. was a city of contrasts. On one side, the monumental grandeur of government buildings. On the other, neighborhoods struggling against systemic neglect. Mrs. Thompson, a local school teacher, speaking to a group of parents at a community meeting. "Our children deserve better. They deserve schools that have resources, teachers who are paid fairly, and neighborhoods where they can feel safe." Mr. Johnson, a concerned parent, raising his hand to speak. "But how? How do we change this when it feels like the whole system is against us?" Mrs. Thompson, sighing. "We keep pushing, we keep demanding. We can't give up on our kids." Politically, the 1970s were a turbulent time. The aftermath of the Vietnam War, the Watergate scandal, and the ongoing struggles for civil rights shaped the national consciousness. Senator Mitchell, addressing a town hall meeting, speaking passionately, "This country is at a crossroads. We can either continue to divide ourselves or come together to build a fairer, more just society. But that requires hard work and dedication from every single one of us. Audience member standing up to voice their frustration. Easy for you to say, Senator. You're not living in our neighborhoods. You're not facing the threats we face every day. Senator Mitchell, nodding solemnly. You're right. I don't face those threats, but I hear you, and I promise to fight for policies that will make a difference. The African American community in Washington, D.C. was particularly affected by these tumultuous times. Despite the gains of the civil rights movement, many families continued to struggle with poverty, discrimination, and violence. Mr. Harris, an elderly community member, speaking to a group of young men on a street corner. When I was your age, we had to fight for every scrap of dignity. Don't think for a second that the fight is over. You have to stay strong, stay educated, and stay united. Young man in the group, frustrated. But what's the point, Mr. Harris? We do all that and still we get treated like second-class citizens. Mr. Harris, with a determined look. Because it's about more than just us. It's about those who come after. It's about leaving this world better than we found it. Amidst this backdrop of social and political strife, the Freeway Phantom's reign of terror added another layer of fear and uncertainty to the lives of African American families in D.C. Detective Anderson, talking to a fellow officer late at night, these girls, they're our daughters, our nieces. We have to find this guy. It's not just about solving a case. It's about protecting our community. Fellow officer, nodding. I know, Anderson, I know, but we're up against a ghost. No witnesses, no leads, it's like he's a phantom. Detective Anderson, determined. A phantom or not, we're not giving up. We owe it to those girls and their families. Detailed profiles of the victims. The Freeway Phantom's reign of terror left a trail of shattered lives and broken families. Each victim was a young African-American girl, full of potential, whose life was cut tragically short. Carol Spinks was the first known victim. A bright, playful girl who loved to help her mother around the house. She was just starting to navigate the complexities of adolescence. Mrs. Spinks, Carol's mother, calling out as Carol leaves the house, Carol, remember to pick up some bread on your way back. Carol, smiling. I won't forget, Mama. Be back soon. Carol never made it back. Her body was found 6 days later, discarded by the side of a highway. The community's shock was palpable, their fear just beginning. Darlenia Johnson was a high school student with dreams of becoming a nurse. She was known for her kindness and her dedication to her studies. Darlenia's friend Lisa, walking home from school with Darlenia, you always got your nose in those books. One day you're going to be the best nurse this city's ever seen. Darlenia, laughing, that's the plan, Lisa. I just want to help people. Darlenia was last seen on her way to a friend's house. Her body was found 11 days later. The community's hope for a quick resolution to the murders began to fade. Brenda Crockett was a lively 10-year-old with a bright future ahead of her. She was known for her infectious laughter and her love for dancing. Brenda's little brother, John, playing with Brenda in their yard. Brenda, show me that new dance move you learned. Brenda, giggling. All right, but you gotta promise to practice it with me. Brenda's abduction was particularly harrowing. She managed to make a brief phone call home, but her location remained unknown. Her body was found the next day, a cruel end to a young life. Nenomoshia Yates was a quiet, intelligent girl who loved to read. She often spent her afternoons at the local library, lost in the worlds of her books. Nenomoshia's librarian, Mrs. Ellis, seeing Nenomoshia check out a stack of books. You're gonna need a cart for all those, Nenomoshia. Nenomoshia, smiling shyly. I just love reading, Mrs. Ellis. I can't help it. Nenomoshia's disappearance shocked her family and friends. Her body was found days later, her dreams of exploring new worlds forever silenced. Brenda Woodward was an ambitious young woman with a strong will and a bright future. She was working part-time while attending school, determined to make a better life for herself. Brenda's boss at the diner, Mr. Jenkins, as Brenda finishes her shift. You're a hard worker, Brenda. I know you're going places. Brenda, smiling. Thanks, Mr. Jenkins. I'm trying my best. Brenda's murder was particularly brutal. Her body found with defensive wounds that indicated a fierce struggle. Her death sent a wave of fear through the community, intensifying the hunt for the killer. Diane Williams was a talented student and athlete. She excelled in track and field with dreams of competing at the collegiate level. Diane's coach, Mr. Brown, encouraging her at practice. "You've got the speed and the determination, Diane. Keep pushing and you'll make it to the top." Diane, determined. "I will, coach. I'll make you proud." Diane was last seen heading home from a friend's house. Her body was found hours later, the final known victim of the freeway phantom. The victims shared many commonalities. All were young African-American girls abducted from familiar surroundings. Yet each had her own unique story, her own dreams and aspirations. The differences in their ages, personalities, and circumstances only added to the complexity of the case. Detective Anderson, reviewing the case files with his partner. "Look at them, so young. Each one with a future that was stolen from them. We have to find a pattern, something that links these girls beyond their race and age." Partner Detective Reyes, frustrated. "It's like he's picking them at random, but there has to be a reason, a method to his madness." The freeway phantom's method of targeting his victims was chillingly methodical. He preyed on their routines, exploiting moments of vulnerability. Community leader Mr. Harris, addressing a neighborhood meeting. "Our children aren't safe. We need to be vigilant to look out for one another. This killer knows our streets, our habits. He uses them against us." Concerned parent Mrs. Green, tearfully. "What can we do? How can we protect them when he's out there lurking in the shadows?" Mr. Harris, resolutely. "We stay united. We keep our eyes open, and we make sure our voices are heard. We won't let him take another child." The freeway phantom spree of terror began in the spring of 1971, leaving a trail of fear and heartbreak across Washington, D.C. Each murder was a calculated act executed with chilling precision. On April 25, 1971, 13-year-old Carol Spinks was sent on an errand by her mother. She never returned home. Mrs. Spinks, frantic, calling the police. "My daughter Carol, she went to the store hours ago. She should have been back by now." Officer Davis, calmly. "Ma'am, we'll start looking right away. Please stay by your phone." 6 days later, Carol's body was found near I-295. She had been strangled. The community's first taste of the freeway phantom's cruelty left them in shock. Less than 2 months later, on July 8, 1971, 16-year-old Darlenia Johnson vanished on her way to a friend's house. Lisa, Darlenia's friend, worried, talking to her mother. She said she was coming over, but she never got here. "Something's wrong, Mom." Darlenia's body was discovered 11 days later, not far from where Carol had been found. She, too, had been strangled. The pattern was becoming terrifyingly clear. On July 27, 1971, 10-year-old Brenda Crockett went missing. That night, the phone rang at her home. Brenda's mother, answering the phone. "Brenda, is that you? Where are you?" Brenda, sobbing on the other end. "A white man has me, Mom. I don't know where I am." The call ended abruptly. Brenda's body was found the next morning, dumped by the highway. The community was gripped by a terror unlike any they'd known. On October 1, 1971, 12-year-old Nenomoshia Yates disappeared after leaving a friend's house. Mrs. Ellis, the librarian, talking to the police. "She was just here, checking out books. I can't believe she's gone." Her body was discovered hours later near Route 50. She had been strangled, like the others. Brenda Woodward, 18, was last seen on November 15, 1971. She was found later that night, in a location consistent with the previous murders. Detective Anderson, surveying the crime scene. "She put up a fight. Look at these defensive wounds. She didn't go quietly." Partner, Detective Reyes, grimly. "But he still got her. Same M.O. as the others. Strangulation, body dumped near the highway." Brenda's case added a new layer of horror to the ongoing investigation. The last known victim, 17-year-old Diane Williams, was taken on September 5, 1972. She was found the next day. Diane's mother, weeping at the crime scene. "Not my baby, not my Diane." Diane's murder confirmed the community's worst fears. The freeway phantom was still out there, still hunting. The freeway phantom's modus operandi was methodical and brutal. His approach followed a disturbing pattern. Abduction. The victims were all taken from familiar surroundings, often while running errands or traveling short distances. Strangulation. Each victim was strangled, a method that left few forensic traces. Dumping of bodies near highways. The bodies were discarded near highways, making discovery quick but providing few clues to the killer's identity. The forensic evidence was sparse, the crime scenes meticulously clean. Forensic analyst Dr. Roberts examining evidence. No fingerprints, no DNA, just the ligature marks and some fibers. He's careful, methodical. Detective Anderson, frustrated. It's like he's a ghost. How do we catch someone who leaves nothing behind? Dr. Roberts, thoughtfully. He may not leave physical traces, but his pattern is his signature. We need to focus on that. The fibers found on several of the victims suggested they had been held in similar environments before being killed. The locations where the bodies were found indicated the killer's knowledge of the city's geography and a calculated plan to instill fear. The community's fear turned to anger and determination. Reverend Thomas, addressing a vigil, "We will not rest until our daughters, our sisters, have justice. This phantom will be brought to light." Mrs. Green, clutching a candle, "We have to protect our children. We have to watch out for each other." The community's resilience became their greatest weapon in the fight against the darkness that the freeway phantom had cast over their lives. The initial police response to the freeway phantom murders was swift but fraught with challenges. The disappearance of young girls from their neighborhood sent shockwaves through Washington, D.C., prompting an immediate but complex investigation. Detective Anderson, arriving at the scene of Carol Spink's disappearance. "All right, team, we need to canvass the area. Talk to everyone. Family, friends, neighbors. Someone must have seen something." Officer Davis, knocking on doors, speaking with neighbors. "Did you notice anything unusual the day Carol went missing? Any unfamiliar faces or vehicles?" Neighbor, shaking her head. "No, officer. She just went to the store and never came back. It's like she vanished into thin air." Despite their efforts, the police found little to go on. The killer left no traces and witnesses were scarce. As the murders continued, the police faced mounting pressure and significant challenges. The community's fear turned to frustration, and the media scrutiny intensified. Chief of Police, Captain Morgan, addressing a press conference. "We understand the community's concerns and we're doing everything in our power to solve these heinous crimes. We need the public's help and cooperation." Reporter, shouting a question. "Captain, why haven't there been any arrests? What about the lack of leads?" Captain Morgan, sighing. "We're following every possible lead, but the perpetrator is highly skilled at evading detection. We're not giving up." The police struggled with limited forensic evidence, a lack of witnesses, and a community growing increasingly distrustful of law enforcement's ability to protect them. Despite the challenges, the police pursued several key suspects and leads, hoping to crack the case. Detective Anderson, reviewing case files with his partner, Detective Reyes. "We've got a few potential suspects. There's that convicted rapist who was recently released, and then there's the maintenance worker with a record of violent behavior." Detective Reyes, pointing to a file. "What about this truck driver? He was seen near 2 of the abduction sites around the time the girls went missing." Detective Anderson, nodding. "Let's bring them in for questioning. We need to keep the pressure on." The detectives tirelessly followed each lead, questioning suspects and cross-referencing alibis. But the elusive nature of the killer made every step a struggle. As the investigation dragged on, the community's involvement grew. Vigilante groups formed and citizens organized neighborhood watches, determined to protect their children and catch the killer. Reverend Thomas, leading a community vigil. "We stand together tonight, united in our grief and our determination. We won't let this monster tear our community apart." Mrs. Green, speaking with other parents. "We need to watch out for each other's kids. We can't rely on the police alone." Mr. Harris, nodding. "Agreed. Let's set up a patrol schedule. We'll take turns watching the streets." The community's efforts brought a sense of solidarity and hope, even as the fear lingered. The media played a crucial role in the investigation, both helping and hindering the police efforts. Sensational headlines and constant coverage kept the public's attention on the case, but also added pressure on the investigators. Reporter Jane Mitchell, reporting live from a crime scene. "The freeway phantom has struck again. Parents are terrified and the city demands answers. The police are urging anyone with information to come forward. Detective Anderson, watching the news report, frustrated. This media circus is making our job harder. Every detail they broadcast compromises our investigation. Captain Morgan, agreeing, we need to control the narrative. Let's hold a press conference tomorrow to update the public without giving too much away. Captain Morgan, addressing reporters. We appreciate the media's role in keeping the public informed, but we ask for discretion. Our priority is catching the killer and ensuring justice for the victims. Reporter, questioning. Captain, what should the public do to stay safe? Captain Morgan. Remain vigilant, report any suspicious activity, and take precautions when traveling alone. We are working tirelessly to solve these crimes. The investigation into the freeway phantom murders was a roller coaster of hope and despair. Breakthroughs were few and far between, but each brought a glimmer of hope that the killer would finally be caught. In the fall of 1972, an anonymous tip came in, offering new hope to the weary investigators. Detective Anderson, answering the phone. Detective Anderson here. Yes, I'm listening. An old warehouse near the highway? We'll check it out right away. Thank you. Detective Reyes, rushing over. What do we have? Detective Anderson. A tip about an abandoned warehouse. It's worth checking out. The police raided the warehouse, hoping to find the elusive freeway phantom. Officer Davis, kicking in the door. Police! Everybody stay where you are. Detective Anderson, surveying the scene, finding old clothes and discarded items. Looks like he might have used this place. Get forensics in here ASAP. The warehouse yielded a few promising leads, including fibers that matched those found on the victims. But the killer was nowhere to be found. A few months later, a woman came forward claiming she had seen a suspicious man near one of the crime scenes. Mrs. Wilson, the witness, nervously. I remember him because he was just standing there watching the kids play. It felt off. Sketch artist, drawing based on her description. We'll circulate this sketch. It might lead to something. Detective Reyes. Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. You've been very helpful. The sketch brought in a flood of tips, but none led to the capture of the phantom. For every breakthrough, there were setbacks that left the investigators feeling increasingly frustrated and disheartened. The sketch led to the questioning of multiple suspects, but none matched the elusive killer. Detective Anderson, exasperated, throwing down a file. Another dead end. How is he always one step ahead of us? Detective Reyes, equally frustrated. He's meticulous, careful. We need something more concrete. At one point, the discovery of a car believed to be linked to the killer seemed promising. Forensic analyst Dr. Roberts, examining the car. We found fibers matching those from the crime scenes, but the car was stolen months ago. The trail's gone cold. Detective Anderson. Damn it, every time we get close, he slips through our fingers. Despite the breakthroughs, the freeway phantom case remained unsolved, largely due to a combination of factors that frustrated the investigators' efforts. Captain Morgan, in a meeting with the lead detectives, we need to understand why we're hitting these walls. What are we missing? Detective Anderson. He's incredibly careful, Captain. He leaves no forensic evidence, no witnesses. He knows our procedures and avoids leaving any trace. Detective Reyes. And the community's fear works in his favor. People are too scared to come forward, or they don't trust us enough to help. Captain Morgan, sighing. We need to rebuild that trust. We need to show them we're here to protect them, not just chase shadows. The freeway phantom's ability to evade capture was due to his meticulous nature and an understanding of police procedures. Each step he took was calculated, every trace carefully erased. Detective Anderson, reflecting with Detective Reyes. You know, Reyes, I've spent nights thinking about this case. He's not just a killer. He's a phantom. No footprints, no fingerprints, just a trail of heartbreak. Detective Reyes, nodding. And yet we keep fighting. For those girls, for their families. We can't give up. The shadow cast by the freeway phantom loomed large over the African-American community in Washington, D.C. The fear and grief were palpable, altering the very fabric of everyday life. Reverend Thomas, addressing a packed church hall, we are gathered here tonight not just to mourn our losses, but to find strength in each other. Our community is under attack and we must stand together. Mrs. Green, tearfully. Every time my daughter steps out, I wonder if she'll come back. I can't sleep. I can't eat. This fear is consuming us. Mr. Harris, angrily. It's not just about our kids. It's about our very way of life. We can't let this monster take that from us. The psychological toll was immense. Parents lived in constant fear. Children were kept under strict watch, and the community's trust in their safety was shattered. Lisa, a teenager, talking to her friend Daryl. I used to walk to school alone, but now my mom won't let me out of her sight. It's like we're prisoners in our own homes. Daryl, nodding. My dad bought a gun. He says we need to protect ourselves, but it just makes everything scarier. The children of the community were acutely aware of the danger, their innocence eroded by the ever-present threat of the freeway phantom. In response to the threat, the community and authorities took drastic steps to enhance safety and raise public awareness. Mrs. Johnson, organizing a neighborhood watch meeting. We need to watch out for each other. Let's set up patrols and make sure our kids travel in groups. Mr. Carter, agreeing. And let's teach them what to do if they feel threatened. Knowledge is power. Officer Davis, providing safety tips. Stay in well-lit areas, don't talk to strangers, and always tell someone where you're going. We're here to help, but we need your eyes and ears. These measures, though helpful, were a constant reminder of the danger lurking in their midst. Reporter Jane Mitchell, reporting on the local news. The community has come together to launch a public awareness campaign. Flyers are being distributed and safety workshops are being held to educate the public on how to stay safe. Community leader Mr. Robinson, speaking at a workshop. We can't live in fear, but we must be vigilant. Know your neighbors, report suspicious activity, and never let your guard down. The campaign brought a sense of solidarity, but the underlying fear remained a constant companion. The long-term effects of the freeway phantom's terror were profound, altering family dynamics and community interactions for years to come. Mrs. Crockett, talking to her therapist. I lost Brenda, and now I can't seem to let my other children out of my sight. It's tearing our family apart. Therapist, sympathetically. It's understandable, Mrs. Crockett. Trauma affects us deeply, but we need to find a way to heal and rebuild trust. Families struggled with the trauma, their relationships strained by the lingering fear and grief. Reverend Thomas, speaking at a memorial service, we have endured so much, but we are still here. Our community is stronger than one man's evil. We will remember our lost daughters, but we will also continue to live, to hope, and to love. Young woman in the audience, speaking to her friend. My aunt was one of his victims, but seeing everyone here today, I know we're not alone. We'll get through this together. The community's resilience became their greatest strength, a beacon of hope in the face of darkness. They found solace in unity, and their collective memory of the victims ensured they would never be forgotten. Decades have passed since the freeway phantom terrorized Washington, D.C., yet the mystery of his identity remains unsolved. Despite numerous attempts, the case has grown cold, lingering in the annals of unsolved crimes. Detective Williams, a seasoned detective now working in the cold case unit. This case has haunted this city for too long. We owe it to those girls and their families to bring them closure. Detective Lee, reviewing old case files. We've got new technology on our side now. DNA analysis, advanced forensics. Maybe we can find something the original investigators missed. The cold case unit has taken up the mantle, determined to shed light on the darkness that has shrouded this case for so long. Advances in technology have breathed new life into the investigation. Techniques that were unavailable in the 1970s now offer fresh avenues for discovery. Forensic scientist Dr. Roberts, explaining to the detectives, we can re-examine the fibers found on the victims using modern techniques. Mass spectrometry and DNA sequencing could reveal new clues. Detective Williams, hopeful. What about the old evidence? Can we extract anything useful from it? Dr. Roberts, nodding, absolutely. Even degraded samples can yield results with today's technology. Let's start with the fibers and any remaining biological material. The reanalysis of old evidence with cutting-edge technology offers a glimmer of hope that new clues might emerge. Detective Lee, working on a computer, I'm cross-referencing the original suspects with modern databases, criminal records, DNA profiles, even social media footprints. Detective Williams, any hits? Detective Lee, a few. Some of the original suspects have descendants who've committed crimes. We might find a familial link. The use of digital databases and modern data analysis tools provides a new dimension to the investigation, potentially connecting dots that were previously invisible. Recent years have seen a renewed interest in the Freeway Phantom case, driven by public fascination with true crime and the relentless pursuit of justice by those involved. Journalist Jane Mitchell, reporting live. Today, the Washington, D.C. Police Department has announced new efforts to solve the decades-old Freeway Phantom case, utilizing the latest forensic technologies. Police Chief Miller, speaking to reporters, "We are reopening this case with the hope that modern science can provide the answers that have eluded us for so long. We are also appealing to the public for any new information." Detective Williams, answering questions, "We're asking anyone who lived in the area during the 1970s who might have seen something to come forward. No detail is too small." The renewed media attention has reignited public interest, bringing new tips and information to light. Reverend Thomas, addressing the community, "We are closer than ever to finding justice for our lost daughters. Stay vigilant, stay hopeful, and continue to support the efforts of our police." Mrs. Green, speaking to a neighbor, "I remember seeing a strange car near our street back then. I never thought it could be important, but now, maybe it is." Neighbor, encouragingly, "You should tell the detectives. Every piece of information could be the key." The community's renewed engagement and willingness to come forward with information provide crucial support to the ongoing investigation. Dr. Roberts, in the lab, excitedly, "Detective Williams, you need to see this. We found a DNA match from the fibers on one of the victims. It links to a relative of one of the original suspects." Detective Williams, leaning over the evidence, eyes wide, "This could be it. This could finally be the break we needed." The discovery of a DNA match from the old evidence brings a surge of hope, a potential breakthrough that could finally unmask the Freeway Phantom. The Freeway Phantom case, steeped in mystery, has given rise to numerous theories about the killer's identity. Each theory paints a different portrait of a shadowy figure who eluded capture for decades. One theory suggests the Freeway Phantom was someone previously investigated but never conclusively linked to the crimes. Detective Williams, discussing with Detective Lee, "Remember John Smith? He was a strong suspect back then, had a criminal record and lived near the abduction sites." Detective Lee, nodding, "But we never had enough evidence to hold him. Do you think he could still be the one?" Detective Williams, "It's possible. We need to revisit his file, see if new evidence can tie him to the murders." Another theory revolves around a transient individual moving from place to place, leaving a trail of terror. Dr. Roberts, forensic psychologist, in a meeting with detectives, "A drifter fits the profile, someone with no ties to the community, blending in and disappearing without a trace." Detective Anderson, "But how did he know the area so well? He seemed to know the best places to avoid detection." Dr. Roberts, "He could have been a truck driver or someone with a job that required extensive travel. That would explain his knowledge and mobility." Some speculate the killer was someone from within the community, a seemingly trustworthy figure hiding a sinister secret. Mrs. Green, talking to her neighbor, "What if it was someone we all knew, someone we never suspected?" Neighbor, shocked, "You mean like a teacher, a store owner, or even a police officer?" Mrs. Green, "Exactly. It would explain how he managed to go unnoticed for so long." Delving into the possible motives and psychological profile of the Freeway Phantom reveals a dark and twisted mind. Dr. Smith, criminal profiler, addressing a team of detectives, "The Freeway Phantom likely had deep-seated issues with control and power. His choice of victims, young, vulnerable girls, suggests a desire to dominate and instill fear." Detective Reyes, "What about his background? What kind of upbringing could create such a monster?" Dr. Smith, Abuse, neglect, or traumatic experiences in childhood often contribute to such pathological behaviors. He might have viewed his victims as symbols of innocence he could destroy. Theories about the killer's motives range from personal vendettas to a twisted sense of mission. Detective Lee, pondering, could it have been a vendetta against the community? Or perhaps he saw himself as some twisted vigilante? Detective Anderson, or he simply enjoyed the power and control, the fear he instilled. Some killers are driven by the sheer thrill of the hunt. Dr. Roberts, the notes left at some crime scene suggest a methodical, almost ritualistic element. This was someone who planned meticulously and took perverse pleasure in his actions. Expert opinions and speculative analysis provide deeper insights but also underscore the complexity of the case. Dr. Robinson, criminologist, on a televised panel, the freeway phantom remains one of the most enigmatic figures in criminal history. His ability to evade capture speaks to a high level of cunning and adaptability. Dr. Michaels, forensic analyst, it's the small details that haunt us. The fibers, the lack of witnesses. He knew exactly how to operate below the radar. Detective Williams, joining the discussion. We've reopened the case with fresh eyes and new technology. We believe it's only a matter of time before we piece together the puzzle. Host, what do you think is the most compelling theory? Dr. Robinson, each theory has merit, but the idea of a transient, someone with no ties and a deep knowledge of the area, seems particularly plausible. However, we must remain open to all possibilities until we have concrete evidence. Thank you for watching Hidden Horrors. If you enjoyed this story and want to uncover more chilling mysteries, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Stay tuned for our next episode where we dive into another unsolved case that will leave you questioning the shadows. Stay curious, stay cautious, stay hidden. And remember, the darkest stories are often the ones we never hear about. Thanks for watching.